What if the person you ignored at the store was the one about to expose everything you believed was safe? What if justice didn't wear a badge, but carried a canvas bag and asked quiet questions? In Brookhaven, a woman was arrested for nothing more than being visible. But 5 minutes later, she rewired an entire system from the inside. This is not fiction. This is not an exaggeration. This is the real story of how Dr. Leona Ramirez, a former federal prosecutor, walked into a high-end boutique and walked out with a broken wrist and a broken silence. She wasn't just profiled, she was punished. But they made one mistake: they didn't know who they were cuffing. And when the truth came out, it didn't shout, it dismantled. This story isn't about revenge, it's about justice reimagined. Welcome to the case that turned a precinct into a classroom, and one quiet woman into a movement. Stay till the end, because the real victory isn't what you think. It started like any other morning in Brookhaven. Warm sunlight spilling over brick sidewalks, birds chirping politely, as if trained not to disrupt the serenity of wealth. Everything about this suburb whispered, everything's under control. But on that particular Tuesday, control was an illusion, because by 9:17 a.m., a woman in a mustard wool coat would be handcuffed just outside the artisan soap aisle. And 5 minutes after that, the very foundation of Brookhaven's trusted institutions would begin to crack. Her name was Leona Ramirez. Not that anyone in that boutique seemed to care. To them, she was just different. Not dangerous. Not loud. Just different enough to raise suspicion. She walked with quiet confidence, clutching a mesh tote that read, "Speak, even if your truth rattles the room." Inside Maison Ren, a store known for its $80 scented candles and lavender teas imported from Provence. She wasn't browsing. She was studying. Notebooks disguised as recipe journals, handwritten notes beneath barcodes, labels with inconsistencies. She wasn't shopping. She was watching, and they were watching her back. A woman in a cashmere shawl turned to the clerk and whispered, "She's been circling the skincare table for 10 minutes. No eye contact, just a suggestion." Coded in condescension, a teenage employee, barely 18, slipped into the back room. Seconds later, the store's soft jazz was interrupted by a chime overhead. "Security to aisle 3. Possible. Retail concern." The message was smooth, plausible, polite. But Dr. Leona Ramirez had heard coded language like that before, just not from behind a diffuser display. She stood still, one hand on a bar of handmade oatmeal soap, the other in her coat pocket, not holding anything, but steady as if bracing. The front door opened. 2 officers stepped in, not local police, private security, the kind that wears sunglasses indoors and calls themselves response professionals. The older one asked first, "Ma'am, we've had a call about suspicious movement. Mind explaining what you've been doing in the store?" Dr. Ramirez didn't blink. "I was comparing moisturizers," she said. "Didn't know that was a federal offense." It should have ended there, but it didn't. The manager approached, thin-lipped and twitchy. "Some customers felt unsafe," he said, glancing everywhere but at her face. She reached into her coat, slowly, to show her store rewards card, just in case it would remind someone she was, in fact, a customer. But it never made it out. The cuffs clicked around her wrists before she could even speak. She didn't resist. Not because she agreed, but because she understood. This wasn't about merchandise. This was about presence. And her presence disrupted the illusion. Brookhaven didn't have a crime problem. Brookhaven had a comfort problem. And in that moment, Dr. Leona Ramirez, Harvard Law graduate, former federal prosecutor, and community advocate, was just another woman of color making people uncomfortable by existing. She didn't raise her voice, didn't protest. She just stared at the rows of pastel packaging as they let her out. The jazz returned, the shoppers resumed, but something shifted. A little girl tugged her father's sleeve and asked, "Is she bad?" The father said nothing, just pulled her closer. Outside, the sun still shined, but everything felt colder. Jamal Green, 23, stood across the street holding an iced coffee that had gone untouched. He wasn't supposed to be there. He'd missed his bus and decided to take a walk while waiting for the next one. But what he saw, what he recorded, would make sure Dr. Ramirez's story didn't stay inside that boutique. He didn't know who she was, not yet, but he knew what he saw wasn't right. And when the video hit 10,000 views within the hour, he knew he wasn't the only one who thought so. The story was just beginning, but in a town like Brookhaven, truth had always been politely ignored. Until now, because that morning the mask of civility cracked. And justice? It was quietly, calmly, stepping in, wearing a mustard coat and handcuffs. And she wasn't done. Not even close. The inside of the patrol car smelled like vinyl and authority. Dr. Leona Ramirez sat still, not slumped, not broken. Still. Her hands rested in her lap, wrists still tight in the cold metal cuffs. Out the tinted window, Brookhaven blurred into brick and glass. She could see her reflection. She looked ordinary. But the stillness in her eyes wasn't surrender. It was strategy. A quiet calculation, not of survival, but of timing. This wasn't the first time she'd been silenced. But it would be the last time someone mistook her silence for submission. The officer in the front passenger seat glanced back. Young, probably mid-20s. He looked like someone who hadn't seen much. Not really. He leaned toward his partner. "Should we radio in?" The driver shrugged. "Manager didn't press charges yet, just keep her in holding till he figures out what makes him comfortable again." Leona heard every word. Of course she did. She used to write policy for moments like this. Now, she was living the policy failure. The irony wasn't lost on her. 10 years ago, she was leading a task force on retail profiling in urban spaces. Today, she was evidence. The cityscape changed as they turned onto Juniper Avenue. High-rises disappeared, sidewalks cracked, the stores had metal grates, and the bus stops had no shelters. This was the part of Brookhaven that didn't get brochures. And up ahead, like a tired sentinel, stood Precinct 12. Leona Ramirez had read about it in a dozen oversight reports. Underfunded, undertrained, overconfident. She never thought she'd walk through its doors from the back of a cruiser. But here she was. The car slowed. No sirens, no urgency. Just a soft hum of power doing what it always did, moving quietly when it thought no one was watching. They escorted her inside. Still no words, no Miranda rights, no questions. Just the clicking of boots against scuffed linoleum. And then the waiting room, no welcome. Just a single flickering light and the dull throb of a broken vending machine. They placed her in a chair in the corner. Didn't uncuff her, didn't log her, just left her there, like an afterthought. She scanned the room. Details mattered. Always. A calendar 3 months behind. A bulletin board full of missing person flyers, many of them brown-eyed, brown-skinned. She breathed slowly. Counted. Remembered. The receptionist didn't even look up, but a name tag read Ortiz. She made note of that. From the hallway, a voice drifted in, amused and arrogant. She was what? Browsing too long. That's our new criminal profile? Leona turned slightly. It was Officer Jameson, tall, lean, ex-football energy. He had no idea who he'd just arrested, but that was about to change. Because as he strutted toward the front desk, laughing to himself, the desk phone rang. The receptionist picked it up, paused, then stiffened. "Yes, sir. She's here." Another pause, longer than a whisper. "She's who?" She slowly turned her gaze toward Leona. Her eyes widened. The phone trembled slightly in her hand. Officer Jameson noticed. "What's up?" Ortiz handed him the receiver. "Line 2. They want to speak with whoever brought her in." Jameson took the phone, arrogance still intact. "Yeah, this is Jameson." Then silence. 30 seconds of it. His expression changed like time-lapse footage. First confusion, then disbelief, then fear. He slowly lowered the phone, as if it had burned his palm. He didn't speak, didn't move, just looked at Leona and finally saw her, not as a suspect, not as a disruption, but as what she truly was, Dr. Leona Ramirez, former Deputy Director of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, co-author of the 2016 Federal Oversight Act, advisor to 3 Supreme Court confirmations, and now, the lead investigator of a covert task force targeting institutional profiling across 3 major U.S. cities, including Brookhaven. She had been operating under direct congressional authority for 6 months, and Maison Ren was the final field test. The officer's voice finally cracked through the silence. Why didn't you say who you were? She looked up, calm, steady. I did. I said I was comparing moisturizers, and you decided that made me suspicious. He didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. Truth doesn't need backup when it walks in the room with memory and purpose. And right now, Truth had a name, and it was Ramirez. The door to the holding area creaked like it hadn't been oiled in years. Leona was led inside. The air changed. It smelled of old coffee, cold metal, and something sourer. Paperwork left to rot in forgotten drawers. No introductions, no formalities. Just a silent shove toward a low plastic chair in a dim corner of the room. The walls were yellowing, paint chipped like Truth scraped off too many times. She sat, still cuffed, still watching. The officer who brought her in walked away without a word, not out of malice, out of routine. This wasn't an exception, it was the process. That was what made it worse. A woman at a computer terminal, badge said C.L. Dawkins, was dragging files across her screen. Leona shifted slightly to see. Her hands were bound, but her mind was unrestrained. She'd been trained for this exact kind of observation, but never from the chair labeled detainee. The monitor flickered. File names rolled past. Footage Maison Ren 0921 MP4, deleted. No prompt, no second check, just gone. Dawkins sipped from a styrofoam cup while pressing delete after. Delete, Leona noted the cup. Plain white. Lipstick smudge on the rim, she noted everything. Because this was no accident. This was protocol. A young man in uniform leaned in from the hallway. Hey, the supervisor wants her logged before the hour's out. Dawkins nodded without looking up. Fine, get her processed. Another officer stepped in. Officer Trent, early 30s, wore his badge like a shield and his power like perfume. He glanced at Leona, raised an eyebrow. Name? She didn't answer. He clicked his pen, twice, loud, annoyed. Ma'am, I asked your name. Leona stared at the pen, then at him. I think you already know it. That gave him pause, for a second. Then he smirked. Well, you're not in court now, counselor. No, she wasn't. But the courtroom was coming, and it would remember every word said here. He turned to Dawkins. Charge her with loitering, add non-compliance, and make a note. She refused to identify. Leona almost laughed. They were building a paper version of her. One that bore no resemblance to the woman actually sitting there. That's how systems worked. They didn't need you to be guilty. They just needed a version of you that made paperwork easier. And inside Precinct 12, paperwork wasn't protection. It was a weapon. Down the hall, voices rose. A heated phone call. The name Ramirez slipped through a cracked door, followed by a second name, Congressman James Holloway. Leona's jaw clenched. Holloway was the oversight chair she reported to. If his name was already echoing through these walls, it meant the top was watching. But inside this building, no one was adjusting. They were doubling down. She could feel it. Power doesn't panic when it's wrong. It panics when it's exposed. Trent returned with a clipboard. Without looking at her, he muttered, Judge Marlin will see the report in the morning. Leona's stomach turned. Marlin. A local magistrate with a long history of letting misconduct. Cases die quietly. He'd once sealed a civil rights complaint involving an 11-year-old boy and a broken wrist. She'd written a dissenting opinion in that report. Now he'd be holding hers. The irony. Thick as the stale air in this place. A printer across the room buzzed to life. Her name rolled out in black ink. But the description wasn't hers. Unidentified female, late 30s, possibly combative. She was 45, calm, documented. But on paper? She was now fiction, and that fiction was being readied for a courtroom. Officer Dawkins stood, stretched, and walked away from her desk. The screen still glowed, still open, still vulnerable, and Leona, still silent, still watching. But now her gaze shifted, not to escape, but to act. Because she wasn't just here to be processed, she was here to map a machine from the inside, and she had everything she needed. Names, screens, voices, patterns. They thought they had her pinned, but they had no idea. This wasn't the collapse of Leona Ramirez. This was the blueprint of something bigger. The system had caged her body, but her mind was already 10 steps ahead. And soon, so would justice be. The room was still. Too still. The kind of stillness that meant someone made a mistake. And that mistake was about to echo. Leona's fingers twitched slightly against the cuffs. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was waiting for opportunity. And it came in the form of a plastic beige phone. It sat on the desk beside the unattended monitor. Dawkins had left it behind. Too confident, too careless. The handset was old, cracked, wired, but operational. Leona shifted her weight slowly and leaned forward. Her wrists, still bound, made the motion awkward, but not impossible. She gripped the phone with both hands, tilted it toward her, and began to dial. Her fingers knew the number by heart. *9. Pause. Then 8 digits burned into memory. The Federal Emergency Override line. She didn't just know it. She'd helped design it. The line rang once, twice, then a voice, sharp, precise, unmistakable. Secure line. Identify. She didn't hesitate. This is Ramirez. Level 3 authorization. Precinct 12. Silence. Then a shift. The tone changed instantly. Leona. Yes. Are you compromised? Her voice dropped to a whisper. They think I'm no one. They've wiped the footage. The reports are being falsified. Local judge is complicit. Possibly more. On the other end of the line, Marcus Thompson stood from his chair. U.S. Attorney General, 3-star commander in the War for Truth, and Leona's oldest friend. He didn't speak right away. Didn't have to. He was already moving. Stay on the line, he said. I need confirmation on body cam activity, timestamps, personnel rosters. Sending them now, she replied, reciting from memory. Cameras are off. No logs entered. Names in play, Dawkins, Trent, Jameson. Judge Marlin for review. Every name was a thread. Marcus began pulling. Behind him, aides scrambled. Inside the Justice Department, lights came on in rooms that hadn't been used in months. This is now federal, Marcus said. I'm authorizing immediate intervention. Level 5. That was the highest level, reserved for emergencies, that threatened public trust and civil order. And that meant only one thing. The Bureau was coming. They wouldn't knock. They wouldn't warn. And they wouldn't miss. Leona exhaled. Not relief. Focus. She had opened the door. Now the system would walk through it and burn what needed burning. Marcus's voice returned. We'll land before dawn. You just need to hold position. Can you do that? She smiled just slightly. I've held worse. I'll be ready. He hesitated, only for a breath, then spoke one last. Timo, thank you, Leona. She didn't answer. She just replaced the handset. The line went dead. But what had begun was very much alive. Outside, Precinct 12 remained quiet. Lights off, voices low, unaware. Inside, Leona straightened her coat, repositioned her wrists, and settled back into the chair. Nothing had changed, but everything had. Because within the hour, 17 black, SUVs would roll through Brookhaven. Federal agents would flood hallways. Names would be called, badges would be stripped, and careers, built on silence, would collapse under the weight of truth. But for now, she waited. Calm, steady. The storm had been dialed, and it was on its way. It began before sunrise. Brookhaven was still sleeping. Porch lights dimmed. Street sweepers rolled by, unaware of what was coming. But on the edge of the city, movement. A black SUV rolled past the outer checkpoint at 4:47 a.m., then another, then 15 more. 17 in total, each one identical, unmarked, uncompromising. Inside, silence. Federal agents in tactical gear, earpieces in, orders memorized. No chatter, no fear. This wasn't a raid. This was reckoning. At exactly 5:03 a.m., the convoy surrounded Precinct 12. No sirens, no announcements, just the hum of power reclaiming its place. Lights inside the building flickered on. Too late. Agent Whitlow gave the signal. Go. Doors burst open. Officers barely had time to stand before they were pushed down. Brad Jameson was the first. He had just poured his coffee, turned, and saw two agents behind him. He reached for his belt. Instinct, wrong move. Federal agents, one barked. Hands where we can see them. He froze, dropped the mug. It shattered across the floor just as he hit it. Cuffed. Read his rights. Dragged out in front of his own desk. Down the hall, Officer Trent tried to run. He made it 3 steps before his arm was wrenched behind his back. He screamed. No one answered, because this wasn't his precinct anymore. Dawkins. She was mid-delete. Her keyboard was snatched from under her palms. You're done, the agent said. And every file you erased, we're pulling it all back. The system they built to erase people was being reversed on them, file by file, line by line. Upstairs, the chief watched the chaos on the security feed. He reached for his desk drawer, key inside, his backup plan. But the door burst open. 2 agents stood in the frame. Chief Warner, you're under arrest for obstruction, conspiracy, and violation of civil liberties. The chief didn't argue. He didn't even ask why. He knew, the moment he saw her, standing in the hall, same coat, same calm, no cuffs, just presence. Dr. Leona Ramirez. She stepped forward. Not with fury, not with vengeance, with purpose. The agent stood back. Let her pass, not as a suspect, as a witness, a survivor. And now, the catalyst. Every corridor she walked through, people stared. Officers who ignored her hours ago now stood frozen, because they knew. The woman they cuffed for suspicion had just turned their fortress into a case file. And the worst part? She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't have to. Justice doesn't scream. It simply arrives. By 6 a.m., the entire building was under federal control. Body cams recovered. Deleted footage restored. Every false report flagged. Every whisper made permanent. By 7, local media had picked up the story. And within minutes, national networks followed. Brookhaven wasn't silent anymore. And neither was the truth. But this was just the beginning. The courtroom was next. Because facts without accountability are just noise, and Leona Ramirez was ready to make them echo. The courtroom doors opened at 4:58 a.m. Outside, the line stretched 2 blocks. Inside, silence. No whispers, no shuffling papers. Just the weight of something irreversible. At the center, a witness stand. Simple, unadorned, but waiting for a name that now carried more force than any title. Leona Ramirez. She stepped into the room with no entourage, no cameras trailing behind her, just her, and a single manila folder in her hand. The judge glanced up. Not Judge Marlin. He'd recused himself hours earlier, forced to, by the Department of Justice. In his place sat Judge Clarissa DuPont. Federal, circuit, known for listening before deciding. Her presence shifted the room, made it feel possible. 3 defendants sat across from her. Brad Jameson, Cheryl Dawkins, Chief Warner, gray jumpsuits, no badges, no pride. The fall was visible. On their faces, empty eyes, tight jaws. Next to them their lawyers, famous ones, expensive ones. But today, even they looked smaller. The prosecution stood, presented the evidence, body cam recovery logs, deleted footage, recompiled. Digital fingerprints tracing every file Dawkins erased. Suspicious female, non-compliant, was read aloud, next to footage of Leona calmly selecting soap. The jury watched in silence, and then came the voice. Leona's, taking the stand. No script, no theatrics, just truth. "I wasn't a threat," she said. "I wasn't angry. I was breathing. And for that I was labeled dangerous." She paused, let the weight hang. They didn't ask for my name. They didn't care who I was. Because in their system, a woman like me, quiet, brown, confident, is a disruption. Not a customer, not a citizen, a disruption. She looked at each of them, one by one, not with rage, but with knowing. She listed names, timestamps, the coffee Dawkins drank while deleting files, the sentence Jameson said before laughing. The exact moment she was pushed into the wall. No notes, just memory. Perfect, sharp, undeniable. The courtroom didn't breathe. And then, a ripple from the back. Jamal Green entered, camera bag on, his shoulder, a flash drive in his hand. "I saved it," he said. His voice trembled, but he stood tall. "They told me to delete it, but I backed it up." He handed it to the clerk. The screen lit up, footage began. There she was. Leona, holding soap, then officers, then the cuffs. Gasps filled the room, even from those who thought they'd seen everything. But then came the bonus footage. What Jamal hadn't meant to catch. His own interrogation, inside Precinct 12. No lawyer, no cameras, just threats and fear. His voice pleading. There, that part made someone cry. No one moved to comfort them, everyone just watched. The truth, raw, unfiltered, alive. When it ended, the judge spoke, not loudly, but firmly. "The court finds the defendants guilty on all counts. Sentencing to follow. No bail, no delay." The gavel fell. 3 lives sentenced. 32 years, 26 years, 18 years. And then, Judge DuPont made history. She invoked the civil restitution clause. For the first time in Georgia's legal record. All personal and hidden assets, frozen, transferred, to a new fund. The Brookhaven Community Justice Trust. To rebuild what had been broken. Not just systems, but people. Outside, the crowd roared. Tears, applause, hugs between strangers. Inside, Leona remained seated. No smile, no victory speech. Just one quiet nod toward Jamal. Because justice doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers, and finally, everyone heard it. They didn't bulldoze the building. They could have. Many said they should, but Leona had other plans. "This place doesn't need to be erased," she told the council. "It needs to be redefined." So they left the bones. Same brick, same foundation. But everything else changed. The barred windows were the first to go, replaced by glass, clear, unfiltered, just like the truth it would now protect. The cells, gone. Walls knocked down. In their place stood classrooms, circles of chairs, chalkboards that bore lessons, not accusations, bookshelves where evidence used to be. The sign outside once read, Precinct 12, Brookhaven Division. Now it said, the Horizon Community Justice Center. Underneath, etched into brass, where silence once ruled, truth now speaks. And inside, 2 people led the transformation. Not politicians, not CEOs, just witnesses who became builders. First, Lisa Patel, the only officer who dared file an internal complaint before the raid. They ignored her then, but not anymore. Now, she was director of operations. Her badge, retired. Her mission, clear. "We don't protect each other," She told her new team, "We protect the people." She installed body cam auditing systems, monthly public forums, and a program called The Right to Watch, training teens how to legally record police encounters. Next, Jamal Green, no longer the quiet college student. Now, one of the most trusted investigative journalists in the state. His online series, The Underside, went viral within a year. He didn't chase headlines. He followed silence and gave it a mic. Each episode told from the ground, from bus stops, corner stores, shelters, places where justice often forgot to show. He turned his footage from that day into a documentary. It didn't win awards, but it changed laws. Brookhaven adopted a new ordinance. No arrest can be made inside a retail space without supervisor-level review, unless a felony is witnessed. It was called the Green Clause, named after the boy with the camera. And at the heart of it all, Leona Ramirez, not a mayor, not a senator, not even a lawyer anymore. She declined every interview, every book deal, every committee invitation. Instead, she packed a canvas bag, moved back into her grandmother's old house, and started teaching. Not at a university, not online. In room 3C of the Horizon Center, a class of 14 students, all ages, all backgrounds, some with records, some with dreams. Every week she stood by the whiteboard. No robe, no podium, just one question. What do you do when power gets quiet? The answers varied, but the silence never returned. Her course? Street law from rights to action. Her curriculum? Lived experience, footage, court transcripts, memory, and truth. She taught them how to read an arrest report, how to file a public records request, how to ask the right questions, and more importantly, how to never look away. One afternoon, a girl named Zaria raised her hand. "Miss Ramirez, do you ever miss being famous?" Leona paused, then smiled. "Justice isn't about being seen," she said. "It's about making sure no one else gets erased." And that became the unofficial motto of the center. Painted on a mural at the entrance, a face surrounded by names of those once silenced, now spoken. Visitors came from all over. Law students, activists, even officers in training. They didn't come to observe a monument. They came to learn from what was rebuilt, from what survived, from what stood back up after the system tried to sit it down. Because the Horizon Center wasn't just a building, it was proof that change doesn't always roar in protest. Sometimes it teaches, it documents, it stays, and it listens. She never asked to be remembered. Not with plaques, not with street names, and definitely not with statues. But somehow, she was. Not loudly, but deeply. Because real legacy doesn't echo in marble. It lingers in people. It walks beside them. Teaches them how to stand when the room leans the other way. Dr. Leona Ramirez left the national spotlight on her own terms. No farewell speech, no press release. Just a locked office and a note. Justice isn't a stage, it's a responsibility. She returned to Brookhaven, to the neighborhood where it all started. She passed the boutique once known as Maison Ren. It had been shut down, replaced by a co-op grocery, locally run, community-owned. On the outside wall, a mural, her silhouette, one hand holding a legal folder, the other holding the hand of a young girl, painted above their heads. You don't need a title to change. The rules. Leona never commented on it. She just nodded each time she walked by. At the Horizon Center, her classroom stayed full. People said she taught law, but really, she taught vision, taught resistance, taught memory. One former student, Damon Fields, now serves on the city council. He still keeps her handwritten feedback note in his wallet. "You don't argue to win," she wrote. "You argue so the next person won't have to." Lisa Patel often said Leona changed her life, but Leona would always reply, "No, you changed your own. I just reminded you it was possible." Jamal Green's office has a framed photo of the old evidence room, not for nostalgia, for accountability. He speaks at journalism schools now, but begins every talk with the same sentence. My first story started with a phone camera and a decision not to blink. When the anniversary of the Horizon Center approached, the board asked Leona to speak. She declined. Instead, she sent them a letter, typed, plain, 1 page. It said, "To those who serve truth, thank you. To those still finding their, we're waiting. And to those trying to silence it, we see you." That was all, but it was enough. Years later, a documentary aired about the events of that week. It was titled The Mustard Coat. Simple, poetic, accurate. Leona didn't appear in the film. She didn't have to. Her fingerprints were everywhere, in every policy shift, every training reform, every citizen who now knew their rights, and used them. In quiet ways, in powerful ways, in lasting ways. There's a garden behind the Horizon Center. Students tend it between classes. No chemicals, just care. They call it Leona's Rest. It's not a grave, it's not even a tribute, it's a place to breathe, to think, to plan. Because that was her real legacy. Not just fighting back, but showing what comes after. What's possible beyond the verdict, beyond the chaos, beyond the cuffs. Her name still appears in textbooks, in civil rights seminars, in mock trial cases. But ask her what mattered most. She'd point to a dusty whiteboard, to a student raising their hand, to a neighborhood that no longer looked away. Dr. Leona Ramirez didn't rewrite the system. She rewired it, from within, patiently, brilliantly, quietly, so that when power got quiet again, as it always does, someone else would already be standing, and speaking, and remembering. Because justice isn't a moment, it's a movement. And Leona, she moved the needle forever, not with noise, but with knowing. And that will never fade. They thought they could silence her, but they didn't understand something simple. You can't silence someone who remembers. You can't erase someone who documents. You can't destroy someone who decided they wouldn't leave. Leona Ramirez didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. And now, that standard lives in classrooms, in courtrooms, in whispered stories of courage passed from neighbor to neighbor. This wasn't just one woman's victory. It was a blueprint for what happens when a community stops looking away. If this story made you angry, good, because anger is fuel. If it made you cry, better, because tears are memory. And if it made you hope, then you're ready to ask more, to expect more, to become more. Because justice isn't just a system, it's a choice, and starting today, you get to make it.